Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordy and Glory video. In today's episode, we will be doing another unit review, this time taking a look at the Heavy Weapons Squad. In case you've not seen one of these videos before, what I like to do is start off with a unit overview, going through its stats, war gear, and abilities. We then move on to the deep dive, where we take a look at the pros and cons of the unit, and some great ways of using it on the battlefield. And finally, we round out with a summary and a score out of 10. And without further ado, let's get some heavy weapons on the battlefield, start setting up, and dive straight into this. So let's start off the day right with that unit overview. What is a heavy weapons squad? Well, it's a heavy support choice, so you'll find it in the same area as your field ordnance batteries and your main battle tanks like the Leman Russ and the Rogel Dawn. Each heavy weapons squad consists of 3 two-man heavy weapon teams. Now, it's important to note that these are not 6 individual wounds. No, they are actually 3 models, and each model has 2 wounds. Now, this is important to understand because when you get hit by multiple damaged weapons, if someone hits you with a damage 2 shot, even if it's only 1 shot that makes it through, it is going to kill an entire heavy weapon team because they are not 2 individual soldiers manning the gun. It is a single model that happens to have 2 wounds. It's just a little important distinction to be aware of because it does make the heavy weapon team slightly fragile to multi-damage weapons. So each one of these heavy weapon teams comes with the following stat line. You have a movement of 6 inches, weapon skill 4+, ballistic skill 4+, strength 3, toughness 3, 2 wounds, as I mentioned, 2 attacks, leadership 6, and a 5+ save. That's a pretty basic guardsman stat line, but it's important to note that there is no squad leader with your heavy weapon teams. When you come across other infantry squads, you'll tend to find that there's some kind of sergeant model in the unit giving it an extra leadership. That is not the case with heavy weapon squads. So even if they lose just 1 chap, they will have to take a leadership test, and if they roll a 6, then another one of the models is going to run away, and then you have to roll to see if that last one runs away on a 1 or a 2. So because there is no sergeant in the squad, they can be a little bit susceptible to leadership shenanigans as well. So that covers the stat line, but what about the equipment that these heavy weapon teams come with? Well, every single one of the teams comes with a heavy bolter, a las gun, and frag grenades. You can swap out that heavy bolter for either an autocannon, a las cannon, a missile launcher, or a mortar. Each weapon team in the squad can be equipped however you want. You don't have to stick to 3 heavy bolters or 3 autocannons. If you want to have a squad that's equipped with a couple of heavy bolters and maybe a lance cannon, or maybe have a couple of autocannons and a missile launcher in there, you can do that if you want to. However, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I highly recommend that when you're putting your heavy weapon squads together, you give each team the same heavy weapon. The reason behind this is you're just going to make it much more efficient and effective on the battlefield. You might think that by giving it a las cannon and an autocannon and a mortar, that you're building a squad that can engage all different target types. The reality is you're actually building a squad that can't engage anything very effectively. A lone las cannon isn't going to give this squad the ability to really effectively hunt tanks. A lone mortar isn't enough indirect fire. You need to concentrate similar weapon types together, and that way when you engage a target that those weapon types are good against, you'll actually be able to do some damage to them rather than just annoying or inconveniencing them. One often overlooked and missed thing about the heavy weapon team is that it can fire both its heavy weapon and the las gun at the same time. You see, in Warhammer 40k, models are allowed to shoot all of their pistol weapons, they can throw a grenade, or they can shoot all other weapons, which means when you're firing your heavy weapon team, don't forget that when you've got a full squad of 3 of these things, not only will you be firing off all 3 heavy weapons, but you'll also have 3 las guns to supplement your firepower. It doesn't seem like a huge amount, and a lot of people will just forget about the las guns, but if you happen to be in rapid fire range and you have the Born Soldiers Regimental Doctrine, then you're looking at a free auto wound every single turn on average, which is actually not something to be sniffed at. But moving on from the equipment, the heavy weapon squads only have one ability, and that is Regimental Tactics. This is the same ability that you're going to find on a lot of your different units. It basically means that if you order a heavy weapons squad, then you can give the same order to one or more other friendly units within 6 inches. So that covers the unit overview, and as you can see, heavy weapon squads are pretty uncomplicated. They're just a nice way of adding some extra infantry-based fire support into your list. But now let's take a look at that deep dive and really start analysing this unit. Let's begin with taking a look at some of the advantages and good things about the heavy weapon squads. The first one and most principal one being the fact that they're so goddamn cheap. Each heavy weapon squad is going to come in at 55 points. You can take 3 of these things and it's only going to cost you the same amount as taking 1 Lehman Russ. The advantage of them being so cheap means that if they die, you don't really mind. They're not a huge amount of points in your list. It's not like when you lose a Baneblade and you've just lost 25% of your army in one go. If you lose 1 or even 2 heavy weapon squads in a turn, it really hasn't put you out all that much. Also, by being cheap, they trade very well. You only have to kill 3 Space Marines and a heavy weapon squad has got its points back. If you take 3 of these things as heavy bolters, you give them take aim, they're probably going to pick up 3 Space Marines without really trying all that hard. And then even if your opponent takes them out later, it doesn't really matter. They've kind of earned their points back and they've done plenty of damage. On top of all this, by being so spammable, you tend to find they have great tactical flexibility. So either you can concentrate them all together and form a bit of a heavy weapons battery, or you can spread them out across your line and provide supplementary firepower in a number of different areas. Maybe you want a trio of las cannons to support a push, or maybe you want 3 heavy bolters to provide a little bit of overwatch on a primary objective, making it a bit tricky for your opponent to move out there and take it. Either way, you've got a lot of different ways you can use these squads. And what really boosts this tactical flexibility is the wide variety of weapon systems that they can pick from. Maybe you want to put pressure on your opponent's light and medium infantry, really start mowing them down. Well, you can take 3 heavy bolters, no problem. Perhaps you're a bit concerned that you haven't got enough anti-tank in your army. You can't really afford another Vanquisher. You don't want to rip the whole list apart and start again. Put 3 las cannons in, 3 missile launchers in, great. Or maybe you want a weapon team that's the jack of all trades but master of none. It can take on some hard targets but still have enough rate of fire to deal with those more hoardy armies. Well then of course you've got the triple autocannon. However, if I was to be totally honest with you, the most competitive way you can take your heavy weapon squads and the most common way you'll find them taken in almost any guard list is with triple mortar. The reason why mortars are so popular is because they're just some of the most efficient and effective indirect fire support in the whole codex, dare I say it, in all of Warhammer 40k. At the end of the day, if you look at, let's say, your field ordnance batteries, that's 130 points and you get 2d6 decent artillery shots. Or for 20 points cheaper, you could take 2 heavy weapon squads, each with 3 mortars. That's 6d6 indirect fire shots. And sure, each individual shot isn't as strong, but there's more of them. And when you're using regimental doctrines like Born Soldiers, the strength and AP of the field ordnance battery isn't such a big deal when the mortars can spam out so many more shots, and thanks to Born Soldiers have so many more opportunities to just do auto wounds against the enemy. I can't overstate this. Indirect fire is one of the most important abilities in Warhammer 40k. It's very powerful, and there's a reason why GW has taken steps to try and tone it down a little bit. The reason it's so good is because you can fire without needing to draw line of sight to your opponent. That means you can shoot at them, and then there's a very good chance they won't be able to see you, so they can't shoot you back. So not only does it mean you can do damage with impunity, but what's really important is you can mess your opponent's plans up. Because he might have put a small unit holding an objective out of line of sight, and his whole plan is this little 5-man squad of Battle Sisters or this little 5-man scout squad is just going to sit on that back objective, drawing no attention to itself, scoring primary points, having a good time. If you could then just pound that unit with mortars and then kill it, it means it really messes up your opponent's plans. So indirect fire is very, very important. And because mortar heavy weapon squads are so cheap, so spammable, it makes them very efficient, and it actually makes them probably one of the best indirect fire weapons in the whole game. Small side note here, but your heavy weapon squads in general will benefit greatly from pairing with Ursula Creed, thanks to her Lord Castellan's Fury ability. Lord Castellan's Fury ability allows her to, when she orders a unit, it gets +1 strength. That means suddenly you can start having strength 6 mortars, which means against enemy light infantry, you're going to be wounding them on 2s. Even against enemy heavy infantry like Death Guard or other toughness 5 units, you'll be able to start wounding them on 3s, which is really, really nice. And even if you're not using mortars, Lord Castellan's Fury is really nice to pair with things like your las cannons, because there are more and more toughness 9 units being introduced into the game. And so strength 9 really can't reliably wound any target on 3s anymore. Being able to get your las cannons up to strength 10 means that they're as powerful as heavy las cannons. They can wound almost any target in the game on 3 to that point, which makes them again a premier anti-tank choice. However, heavy weapon teams are not perfect. They do have a number of flaws that you really need to be aware of if you're going to get the most out of them. First off, they're pretty slow. You're only moving 6 inches a turn. When you compare that to a Lehman Russ, which is going 10 inches a turn and firing without any penalties, it does make you realize that when these things set up, they're probably going to be in that position for the rest of the game realistically. And because they're infantry using heavy weapons, if they do move, they're going to incur a -1 to hit penalty, which means that you could be hitting people on 5s. And even if you're using heavy bolters and you're trying to get a really high rate of fire, you're not going to hit very much. Most of your shots are going to go wide. And then even if you're really cheap, doing no damage a turn is still not something you want a unit to be doing. So they're pretty slow and they tend to be pretty static as well. Also, if you're taking them with direct fire weapons like autocannons and las cannons and so on, you're going to find very quickly that these guys are very fragile. It doesn't take more than a handful of bolter shots to really pick up a squad like this. Even if they're dug into cover, they're only going to have a 4-up save, and that means that any sort of spare firepower that your opponent just happens to have left over, he'll chuck into your heavy weapon teams and kill them. And it's not like they're a low priority unit. If it was just 6 guardsmen running around with las guns, your opponent probably not going to bother with them. But each one of those teams is packing some pretty serious firepower. If your opponent gets the chance to kill him, he's going to. This is another reason why so many people end up taking them with mortars, which means that even though on paper they have great weapon variety, the reality is that really they might as well just have mortars, because most guard players learn the hard way in their career, including yours truly, that equipping them with anything other than mortars is basically a death sentence for these guys. And another thing that doesn't really pan out from paper into reality is the fact that heavy weapon teams do have a number of hidden costs. Principally, they're going to need an officer nearby to give them orders, because without orders, they're not actually very good. You really want to be giving these guys take aim pretty much every single turn, especially if you're using them with those indirect fire mortars, because you need some way of getting past the indirect fire nerf. If you don't know what that nerf is, basically if you're shooting a weapon indirectly, so you don't have line of sight to the enemy, you suffer a -1 to hit penalty and your opponent gets +1 to their armor save. So you need to use the take aim order, which gives you +1 to hit, +1 AP, just to get these guys hitting at their normal base rate. And despite the fact that they need officers and orders to shine, they actually have no Voxcaster rules. I know you might think that this guy in the picture here has got a Voxcaster on. Clearly, that is some kind of optical illusion, because there are no rules for Voxcasters on the heavy weapon team datasheet. That's a really annoying problem to have, because if you're trying to do your secondary objectives like inflexible command, then it means that you need to have officers within 6 inches of your heavy weapon squads in order to be able to score that secondary as effectively as possible. It means that you're going to have some kind of officer unit babysitting the heavy weapon teams, and you might not really want to be doing that, especially if you're in a pretty intense fight. Another subtle yet quite impactful flaw with the heavy weapon squad is it takes up a valuable heavy support slot. In Arcs of Omen, your heavy support slots are actually pretty valuable because unless you're taking them as a compulsory option, you only get 3 of them. And that means you might only have 1 or 2 of these things spare after you've included all of the Lehman Russes and Rogel Dawn stuff that you want in your army. Now, of course, you can get around that by being like, okay, well, I'll take heavy support as my compulsory option in my Rogel Dawn attachment. That means I've got 6 slots. Great, that does solve the heavy weapon problem, but then you've only got 9 troop choices. And for a lot of guard armies, they're wanting to take 100, 110, maybe even 120 line infantry to be able to provide enough screening for your tanks and other heavy weapons. But if you've taken heavy support as your compulsory option, you only have access to 9 troop slots. That means you've only got access to 90 infantry, and quite frankly, that might not be enough. So heavy support teams are great, but they can start causing a bit of a traffic jam within your force organization chart. But that covers the deep dive of the heavy weapon squad, all of their pros and cons. And now all that's left to do is give this unit a score out of 10. And I'm going to give the heavy weapon squad a solid 7 out of 10 score. They really are a very efficient light artillery option, and most commanders will benefit from including several mortar teams in their army. However, they're not without their flaws. They are incredibly fragile, and outside of using them as mortar teams, they really do struggle to make their mark on the battlefield. But that's just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Do you like taking heavy weapon teams? Are you using them in the new codex? Or have you found there are other heavy support options that are really doing it for you? Let me know down in that comment section. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure you smash that like button like it is a big titty Eldar girlfriend, and also subscribe to never miss an episode. If you found today's video particularly helpful and you want to see more content like this, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. Channel membership and Patreon support really is the lifeblood of this channel, and it allows me to do Mordy and Glory full-time and put extra effort into every single one of these videos. One of the biggest perks of becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter is you gain access to the Mordy and Glory Discord server. This is an online community of almost 1,000 active people. It's always popping off in the MG Discord, and we've got areas for discussing tactics, strategy, army list, painting, hobbying, and we've even got a pretty spicy meme section as well. So if that sounds like a ton of fun or a pretty helpful resource, please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. And I'd just like to take a moment to thank all of the latest channel members. So a big thank you to Wildness Warrior, Wave Summers, Fengosk, Graham Slam, Andreas, Zachary Durand, Ryan King, Azino, Chris Me, Ben, Bones, Eric, Mayo Nation 88, and Mr. Super Nintendo Chalmers. Thank you guys for doing your part. Thank you for becoming channel members. I'd also like to do a shout out to the latest Patreon supporters as well. So a massive thank you to Leslie, Max Rowe, Gibraltar, SM, Philip, Theoria, KitKat, Sweet and Sour Ass, JK, Brandon, Brian, and Watchmaster 134-4. Thank you guys for becoming Patreon supporters. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal, heartfelt and special thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a massive thank you to Alan Blunt III, Bonbon Vert, Mark Panconi, Ross Miller, Swordfish Trombone, Watchmaster 134-4, Alex Dengal, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, Tom Sutton, and of course, August Varney. Thank you guys for your incredibly generous support. It makes a huge difference, and it's a big part of how I'm able to do Mordy and Glory full time. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.